This is the Black Information Network Daily Podcast, and I'm your host, Ramses Ja. And sometimes the amount of stories that make their way to us means that we simply can't cover everything that comes our way. But from time to time, a story just stays with me, and I feel compelled to share it with you and give you my thoughts. And now, one more thing.
I got one more thing I want to talk to you about right now.
For Jackson, who's won 13 championships, 11 as a head coach, it was just too much for him. He'd continue. They even had slogans on the floor, on the baseline. It was catering. It was trying to cater to an audience or trying to bring a certain audience into play, and they didn't know it was turning other people off. People want to see sports as non-political.
All right. If you're a fan of sports, you might have already known a little something about that. Phil Jackson's thoughts on the NBA, and I guess a good way to say it is where they went wrong or where they lost his engagement. But if you're like me, you don't really pay too much attention to sports, and so that algorithm stuff isn't served to you the way other things might be. And so we're here to discuss that a bit. When I say we, today I'm joined with my frequent collaborator, soon to be permanent collaborator.
Talk to him.
Q Ward, who is a person who exists in that space. He follows sports. You are an athlete, a former athlete.
Former athlete.
Listen, you got to put a strong emphasis on the former. So I couldn't run to where you're sitting right now if I tried to. So
well, I know that
stress the former.
I know that you are. You come from that world.
Yes, sir.
You know, I'm not an athlete like that, and so I've always been a music guy. And so the hysteria and the fascination with sports is something that is always kind of eluded me. But there's a lot to be said there because, for better or worse, much of our country and indeed our world pays attention to sports.
Mm-hmm.
And sports is among the biggest cultural components that human beings share, that we, that galvanize us, that kind of gets us in alignment on certain things, starts conversations, so forth and so on. Just the part that again, it eludes me. Now, Phil Jackson is a name that I know because Michael Jordan is a name that I know, and Kobe Bryant and, those sorts of folks. And Phil Jackson's thoughts on the NBA or, where the NBA kind of lost his support or enthusiasm is a little strange. But why don't you do us a favor, Q? Why don't you give us a little bit of background on this again for folks who are not familiar with the story?
Phil Jackson. His name is probably most synonymous with winning. Not just one of the winningest coaches in the history of sports, but pretty iconic even in that space because of who he won with. And it's the who he won with part that makes everything that he said regarding how he feels about the NBA and their messaging and the direction that they took with regard to what I think he wants to call politics instead of humanity. And a lot of people do that, right? If you guys start leaning too far opposite straight Christian white men, then you're being political. How dare you fight for rights of people that don't look, love, and sound like you? You're being political. You're not being a humanitarian. Phil Jackson, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen. 6 championships, I think, in a span of 8 years. Back to back to back twice. So they three-peated, took a break.
And repeated the three-peat.
Yeah. But again, Michael Jordan, historically great black athlete. In some people's mind, with legitimate justification, greatest athlete they've ever witnessed. Scottie Pippen, think top 50 greatest NBA players of all time. Dennis Rodman, NBA Hall of Famer, and a host of Black role players in that section of his career.
Mm-hmm.
He then moved on to, I wouldn't say greener pastures because you can't really get on a higher plane than Michael Jordan, but have you ever heard of Shaq and Kobe?
Mm-hmm.
Phil Jackson,
yeah,
Shaquille O'Neal, top 25 greatest specimens of athlete that the world has ever seen. Kobe Bryant. I don't even need to say anything more, right? Historically great Black men helped turn Phil Jackson into an icon. Phil Jackson, an athlete and coach in his own right, in his own space, but take those guys away and there's nothing to speak of in either vein, as a player or as a coach. Add those historically great Black men to his life and he is now iconic. So for someone who made an entire career and an entire post career, he went on to make millions of dollars to just be in the building at other organizations where he didn't impact winning at all. Tens of millions of dollars to give his opinion, to be a consultant, to be a front office person who didn't do a good job because of what he did on the backs of these incredibly historic Black men.
Real quick,
Please.
I want to jump in right here. I appreciate you so much because all of that stuff you just said about tens of millions and back ends, and it's not a thing I would ever even know about. So now you all listening, now you understand why sometimes I got to call in these heavy hitters, but please continue.
So ironic is just the word I use because my vocabulary isn't more sophisticated. I don't have better words. I don't have more
I don't
words.
think the English language really
what I
has.
mean? But it's ironic that a person who's the reason you know his name is because of Black men.
Yeah.
Hard stop.
So
ironic that his issue, and one that I bet has been itching to say something to someone about, is that they started saying Black Lives Matter, and that's where they went too far for him.
You know what? I want to say something. Now, I don't know this. This is me just kind of deducing from this phenomenon that I've seen in recent years. I would imagine that Phil Jackson is the sort of person who would have taken issue with Colin Kaepernick kneeling. I would have imagined that Phil Jackson is the sort of person who would have taken issue with Muhammad Ali back in when he had changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, and all of the other. We mentioned Jesse Owens. We mentioned on our actual radio show on Civic Cypher. We mentioned. Oh man, I'm not a person who follows sports, but this is not an exhaustive list that I'm giving right now of athletes, people with prominent stages in the athletic arena.
Bill Russell would come to mind.
There you go. Thank you.
Lou Alcindor.
Thank you.
Formerly, who's now Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
There's another.
Jim Brown.
That's who I was thinking.
That list can start to grow pretty fast if you start down that road.
And there's plenty of women who've contributed as well, because again, we've covered a lot of the names on our show over the years. The thing that gets me, however, is, so let me paint this picture a little bit better. I got something from Phil Jackson himself. When asked why, Phil says the NBA did something wanky while in Orlando, namely getting mixed up in politics with a bunch of slogans on the court and on the jerseys of the players themselves. He never says BLM, but there's no doubt that's what he's talking about here, even if he kind of mocks it, saying he joked about it from home with his family. So this is something that we got from the Young Turks. It's kind of a little message, but this story is out there if you want to actually find out what he said and his thoughts. The thing about this is that it shows to a person like me who prior to this would have thought of him as an ally, would have thought of him as a person who really understands it, who has spent time with Black people, not all of whom are millionaires when you first meet them. You know, some of these people have had a rough go at life, and basketball or sports is the only thing that they've had. And they are a natural talent, and they work to develop that talent. And then here they are on this, one of the biggest stages in this country. And they bring all of their blackness and the trauma and the exhaustion and everything that brings with it with them. You know, if they've lived 19, 20 years, however old they are when they get to the NBA, they also bring their communities. They bring their social circles, you know what I mean? And then, of course, their way of thinking, the way the world has treated them, where they've seen gaps in the promises that America is supposed to have made to her citizens. So I would have thought that Phil Jackson, being in that position, would have a very good understanding of what all comes with being Black, successful, and having a desire to empower those who may never step foot on that court, never have the opportunities that you have. Right? And this is just absolutely heartbreaking.
Have you ever heard the saying, in it, but not of it?
Mm-hmm.
His proximity to Black people doesn't mean anything.
And I learned that.
You know what I mean? I had a person that I, had a professional relationship with recently say to another colleague of ours, I'm practically Black.
Hmm.
And it wasn't because he even grew up around Black people. Works with some of us, likes hip hop, wears Jordans. So in his mind, he might as well be one of us.
Black experience, sure.
You know what I mean? And I'm a person, and you know this. I have 6 sisters.
Mm-hmm.
You know how much about women I don't know or understand.
Thank you.
You know what I mean? Like the idea that because you're around it, because you spend a lot of time. My whole life, I've had 6 sisters. I am clueless.
Yeah.
Still trying to figure it out. So there are people who you think would have a heightened sense of empathy, a heightened sense of understanding, and be a bit more invested in our experience. There's a for-profit experience for him, and it lifted him into the stratosphere. And he didn't have enough gratitude for it to say, okay, maybe I should at least shut up. Even if I don't agree with that, even if I don't champion those causes, I should at least shut up. Because some of the most important, famous, and not so much Black people in history changed his life forever and for better. And even they didn't deserve for him to not trample over the idea that Black lives matter.
You know, there's something here too. We've had this conversation also, but I think it bears mentioning in this moment. Those same people who feel like they empathize and they understand what it's like to have the Black experience. They're basically Black, as you mentioned. First off, to know what it's like to be a Black man is something that I might say I know full well. I've lived this life as a Black man. But that experience, I understand, also goes well beyond just my own individual experience growing up in Los Angeles and Phoenix, Arizona. I didn't grow up in the South. You know, there's a lot of things that have happened to me and a lot of things that haven't happened to me. And so for anybody to have this arrogant, self-centered position on things that they themselves have not experienced is a slap in the face or something. It diminishes the weight of our actual lived experience. So I want to say that first. But we mentioned before on our show on Civic Cypher that James Baldwin many years ago made an interesting point that, again, bears repeating. He said that I'm going to paraphrase, but effectually what was communicated was that someone came to him and said, hey, you know, James, these things just take time. You know, you're fighting for rights and you're fighting for equality and equity and so forth, but these things take time. To which James Baldwin replied, how much time is this going to take? Because it's already taken my grandparents' time, taken my parents' time, it's taken my sister's time and my brother's time. Of course, it's taken my time. How much time does it take for us to move forward? What timeline would you have me measure success in this arena against?
This progress that you speak of.
This progress that you speak of, there it is. And I think that I want to take that a step further. And I'm confident I'm not the first person to say this, but in this instance, it's not even a matter of time. It's a matter of how do we bring attention to issues that affect our communities, right? And this is why so many people took issue with Kaepernick, right? Because they were trying to say that, oh, this isn't the arena that sports should be free from politics. This is exactly what Phil Jackson was saying. Yeah, that's actually a line from his statement or whatever.
Except they don't even mean that, right? Because sports should be immune from politics that don't align with ours, is what they mean.
Because that flag
is all over the field. That military jets fly over the game.
Yeah,
like it's
support the truth, all of that.
Parrot our politics and you're fine.
Yeah.
Disagree with us and you need to stay in your place. Shut up and dribble. Or shut up and do whatever it is we're paying you to do.
Thank you,
boy.
Ooh, man, don't let me stop you.
Go ahead. What I mean? Like it's never been about not being political.
Mm-hmm.
The president comes to the game. They put the camera on him. Like they don't mind that it's political.
Mm-hmm.
It's a commercial for our military. They don't mind that it's political.
Mm-hmm.
As long as it falls in line with their beliefs, go for it. Proud to be an American? Go for it. Not proud of everything about your country? Shut up.
Yeah. Critical of America? Yeah. Sit down, boy.
Yes.
And so this is where I think the idea of kind of bringing up James Baldwin came from, because I think that those are two sides of the same coin. One is that, oftentimes people who are not actually living this experience will look at Black folks, mostly in this country, moving to change the world for their future and their posterity, and say, well, this should take time. And then they'll also say, well, that's not the way that you should go about doing these things. Like their idea and their timeline is something that we should all adopt. And even if that were the case, that progress still hasn't been made. It's like the goalpost continues to move. And for a person like Phil Jackson, it feels particularly disheartening and upsetting, because again, this is the sort of person that you would think would get it by now, right?
Yeah, I wish that timeline was that actually. Like I wish we had a timeline. This isn't the proper time or place, but on Monday at 6 we can get to that. Instead, they're like, this isn't the proper time or place.
Well, I think there's a lot to think about here. Places where I think we would have assumed there would have been allies. At least I learned that that's not always the case. That in no way means that I want to suggest that everyone who has stood by and maybe hasn't been as vocal, maybe it's not your way. We hope that you come around, but this is not to suggest that, you're under a magnifying glass, but rather this is to say that if Phil Jackson is capable of this, it is a little concerning, because there's a lot of overlap between Black people and white people, not just in the sports arena. And you would think that just proximity alone would endear us to each other on levels that are a little bit more meaningful. And as we're seeing now, that a person who has benefited, as you mentioned, Q, from working with the greatest Black athletes to ever play the game, and has millions and millions of dollars to show for it. And what I'm trying to suggest is that he's very successful as a result of these relationships.
As a direct result of those relationships,
right?
Too. Not ancillary, not auxiliary, direct.
Yep. And for a person like that to then look at the whole race of people moving to try to further their cause, which is to hold police accountable and the entire criminal justice system accountable, and to change systems that result in outcomes that we've seen and that we push back against, and to have that make its way to the black players who play the game in the same way that it made its way to literally every black person who worked in any capacity. And I don't care what job you have, but those in particular who have that level of a stage, I think that is just heartbreaking. And we'll have to, I guess, pay closer attention to the writing on the wall, because I never will, because it's sports, but there have been other people who've come out and said, this kind of lines up, we never seen Phil here. We never seen Phil there. So now I'd love to open the floor up to you as always. You can reach out to me, using the iHeartRadio app, use the red microphone talkback feature. And of course, I'm on all social media at Ramses Ja. Q, let them know your social media.
I am Q Ward. Excuse my voice trying to leave me again. I am Q Ward on Instagram. I'm not really on anything else.
That's all that matters. So we'd love to hear from you. Let's talk more about it. And until we do, peace. This has been a production of the Black Information Network. Today's show is produced by Chris Thompson. Have some thoughts you'd like to share? Use the red microphone talkback feature on the iHeartRadio app. While you're there, be sure to hit subscribe and download all of our episodes. I am your host, Ramses Ja, on all social media. Join us tomorrow as we share our news with our voice, from our perspective, right here on the Black Information Network Daily Podcast.